The Bible is strangely silent about the majority of Jesus' life. From the moment he appears at age 12, teaching in the temple, until his baptism around age 30, the story goes dark. 18 years, nearly 2 decades erased from one of the most significant lives in human history. Scholars call them the lost years, and for centuries, people have filled the silence with speculation, mystical journeys to India, hidden teachings in Egypt, secret initiations in the East. But the Urantia Book offers a very different and profoundly human account. It tells us that during those missing years, Jesus was not traveling the world collecting wisdom. He was doing something far more meaningful, living the complete human experience in all its pain, beauty, responsibility, and ordinariness, so that when his mission began, it would be built not on divine detachment, but on intimate understanding. The silence begins shortly after one of the most formative events in Jesus' life, the death of his father Joseph, when Jesus was about 14. This tragedy shattered the relative stability of the family's life in Nazareth. Overnight, the eldest son became the man of the house. From that day forward, Jesus was no longer simply a curious boy fascinated with questions of heaven and earth. He was a provider. He had a mother to support and several younger siblings to care for. And though he knew deep within his soul that he carried a cosmic destiny, that destiny would have to wait. Jesus embraced this burden without resentment. This period of labor and sacrifice was not a detour from his mission. It was the foundation of it. It taught him empathy for every parent struggling to feed their family. It taught him patience and humility, and it grounded his teachings in the realities of everyday human life. In his late teens and early 20s, Jesus became known not as a prophet or preacher, but as a carpenter and builder. Day after day, he shaped wood and stone with his hands, creating tools, furniture, even parts of homes. People in Nazareth came to respect him, not because of any miracles, but because of his character. He was honest, fair, dependable. He treated customers with dignity and paid workers justly. The Urantia account emphasizes that these ordinary years were anything but wasted. They were essential to the larger story. Through work, Jesus learned the dignity of labor and the daily challenges of those he would later teach. Through service, he earned the trust and affection of his community, a trust that would follow him even when his message became controversial. But make no mistake, even while laboring with saw and hammer, Jesus' mind never stopped reaching toward the infinite. He remained endlessly curious. He asked profound questions, often so deep that even his mother Mary and teachers in the synagogue struggled to answer them. He pondered the nature of the universe, the will of the Father, the destiny of humankind. He studied not only Hebrew scriptures, but the philosophies of surrounding cultures, Greek, Persian, Egyptian, trying to understand the common thread that bound humanity's spiritual longing. He debated scholars in Sepphoris. He listened to travelers in the marketplace. He absorbed stories from different lands and reflected on their deeper meaning. All of it was part of his preparation, not for conquest or political revolution, but for the task of revealing truth to the human heart. By his early 20s, Jesus' responsibilities at home had begun to ease. His younger brothers were taking on more of the family burden, and his mother Mary, though still deeply reliant on him, encouraged her eldest to seek the wider world. And so, quietly and without fanfare, he did. Jesus embarked on a series of travels across the Mediterranean world, not as a teacher or miracle worker, but as a humble observer. He sought no followers, preached no sermons, and revealed nothing of his cosmic identity. Instead, he moved among ordinary people, working side jobs, conversing with scholars, and learning from diverse cultures. He journeyed north into Syria, then westward through the Roman provinces. In Damascus, Alexandria, and even as far as Carthage, he encountered philosophers, priests, merchants, and mystics. Everywhere he went, he asked questions, and he listened. It was here, far from home and anonymity still intact, that he learned one of the greatest truths of his mission. Humanity's hunger for God was universal. It transcended language, geography, and doctrine. Whether they called him Zeus, Ahura Mazda, or Yahweh, people everywhere yearned for the same Father, and Jesus vowed that one day he would reveal that Father more clearly than ever before. Each encounter on his travels left an imprint. In Alexandria, he debated the Hellenistic philosophies about ethics and virtue. He discovered the strength of reason and the power of logical discourse, tools that would later help him engage with skeptics and scholars alike. In Antioch, he walked among temples devoted to countless gods and realized how deeply humans desired the divine. Yet, how often they sought it in fear. This, he decided, must change. Humanity needed to know God not as a distant monarch demanding tribute, but as a loving father inviting relationship. In the marketplaces of Phoenicia, he worked alongside sailors, traders, and laborers. He learned their joys and sorrows, their hopes and disappointments. These experiences would later flavor his parables, stories that resonated with farmers, fishermen, and tax collectors because they were drawn from real human life. The Urantia narrative emphasizes that these were not wasted years. They were years of absolution. Jesus was building the greatest sermon of all, not through words, but through living. By the time he returned to Palestine in his late 20s, Jesus had seen enough of the world to understand humanity's deepest commonalities. The divisions between Jew and Gentile, rich and poor, free and enslaved, all seemed smaller against the backdrop of what united them. Everywhere, people longed for love, purpose, forgiveness, and hope. Everywhere, they wrestled with fear and failure. And everywhere, they were searching, sometimes desperately, for God. This global awareness profoundly shaped his later ministry. This is why his message transcended tribalism. It is why he constantly broke barriers, dining with sinners, speaking with Samaritans, healing Roman soldiers' servants. It is why he proclaimed a kingdom not for one nation, but for all humankind. These insights weren't born of revelation alone. They were born of lived experience. Without these lost years, the message might have been smaller. Because of them, it was cosmic. The final stretch of these hidden years was marked by contemplation. Jesus returned often to solitude, retreating into hills and deserts to commune with the Father. In those quiet places, he reflected on everything he had seen, the suffering and the beauty, the wisdom and the ignorance, the potential and the despair. And he made a choice. His mission would not be about overthrowing Rome, fulfilling prophecies, or satisfying nationalistic dreams. It would be about revealing the Father's love, teaching the way of inner transformation, and showing the universe what a human life in perfect harmony with God could look like. The Urantia Book makes it clear. By the time John's voice cried out in the wilderness, Jesus was fully prepared. Not just spiritually, but humanly. Not just divinely, but personally. He was ready, not because he had studied under great teachers or wielded divine power, but because he had walked the dusty roads of the world as one of us. By the time Jesus returned from his travels, the carpenter from Nazareth was no longer simply a craftsman, son, or seeker. He was a man whose soul had been forged by the full spectrum of human experience. And this is precisely what the Urantia Book emphasizes. The lost years were not lost at all. They were preparation, deliberate, essential, and irreplaceable. Had Jesus entered his public ministry straight from boyhood, his message might have lacked the richness of lived compassion. Had he performed miracles from the moment he could walk, his empathy might have been shallow. Instead, he learned hunger and hard work. He knew grief, confusion, friendship, betrayal, joy, and wonder, not as divine abstractions, but as lived realities. This is why, when he finally spoke to multitudes, his words pierced deeper than dogma. His stories about farmers, widows, tax collectors, and shepherds weren't crafted in a vacuum. They were drawn from a life spent among them. Many have wondered why Jesus waited until about 30 years old to begin his public work. After all, many prophets before him had spoken out far younger. Why delay the most important mission in human history? The Urantia Book answers this with profound simplicity, because his mission wasn't only about revealing God. It was about revealing what it meant to be fully human in perfect union with God. That could not be demonstrated in theory. It had to be lived. Every decision he made during those quiet decades, to support his family, to work with his hands, to study the world, to walk among the forgotten, was part of a divine demonstration. He showed that holiness was not confined to temples or scrolls. It could be lived in a workshop, in a marketplace, or on a road far from home. And by the time John baptized him in the Jordan, Jesus could speak to the human condition with unmatched authority because he had lived it. One of the most striking outcomes of these lost years was the universality of Jesus' message. Had he spent his life cloistered in Galilee, his teachings might have been deeply Jewish, but narrowly tribal. Instead, because he walked among Greeks, Persians, Romans, and Africans, because he saw humanity in all its diversity, his gospel transcended race, language, and religion. He would speak of a kingdom not of this world, one that welcomed every nation, every class, every soul. He would teach that God was not the tribal deity of one people, but the Father of all creation. And he would insist that faith, not bloodline or ritual, was the passport into this kingdom. The Urantia narrative suggests that this expansive vision was no accident. It was the fruit of his earlier experiences. The boy of Nazareth had become the Son of Man for all mankind. Perhaps the most revolutionary lesson of the lost years is also the simplest. Ordinary life is not an obstacle to spiritual growth. It is the very soil in which it blooms. Jesus did not become divine in spite of his work, struggles, and responsibilities. He revealed divinity through them. The mundane became sacred in his hands. A table carved in Nazareth, a conversation with a traveler, a day's wage honestly earned. And this, too, was part of his teaching. When he later spoke of the kingdom of heaven being within you and among you, he meant it. It was not locked away in temples or reserved for prophets. It was present in the everyday lives of ordinary people, just as it had been in his own. When the gospel writers fell silent for 18 years, they left the impression that Jesus' life paused. But the Urantia Book reminds us that nothing could be further from the truth. Those were the years that prepared the ground for everything that followed. The lost years were the years of becoming, of shaping the message, deepening the compassion, broadening the vision. They were the years that transformed a carpenter into a teacher, a seeker into a savior, and a son of man into a son of God who would reveal the Father to the world. And when he stepped into the Jordan to be baptized by John, heaven did not just look down on divinity clothed in humanity. It looked upon humanity, fully lived, fully loved, and ready to change the course of history forever.